My God, I have been muted this whole time. Sober lady, I'm going to start over. The Obama's Counterfeit Catholics presentation has been loaded to this channel. Go through the videos. I loaded it last week. Yes, Judy, you have a lot to catch up on. All the videos are up. I do have sound now, Keza. I'm sorry. Yes, you should have sound now, don't you? Isn't the sound good? I'm showing that it's running good. So hopefully you all can see it now. Yay, thank you. Yes, I got sound. Okay, so as I'm looking forward to today's show, I'm going to go through the rest of the Vatican Decodes. I've done that pretty much over all this whole series, starting out with the first video, which was more of the Catholic stuff, you know, the numbers in the Bible and how they equate to Q. And then I went through the 3 sides of the triangle. That's the very first video. And here at the parade, Scott Zimmerman was kind enough to upload the one I did on his show, so that, you know, the first video is from his show. And then these last 3 shows plus this one, I'm going through all the decodes. And what you started to see is that there's a deep church, and the cover-ups are always worse than the crime. Today we're going to go through the rest of the decodes. So hopefully by the time we're done, we can answer the question, given what we know, do you think, is it possible to look at the church objectively? Because there's a lot of things happening that I think the world at large would do well to understand. So there's been so many pieces of information I put out. I got a lot more today. But what I've been pointing to is that socialism did infiltrate the church. And we'll get into more of that in other shows, but socialism did infiltrate the church. It infiltrated the church starting in about 1921 with the objective of recruiting young gay men to infiltrate all the seminaries so that they could rise through the ranks and then be used to liberalize and weaken the church, which, if you go back to Our Lady of the Good Success from 1610, she said, woe to the children of the latter part of the 20th century. Hate to say that. She doesn't say woe to the Catholic children. She says woe to the children. And remember, in 1610, Protestant Reformation had already happened. So obviously the Holy Mother sees all of us as the children of the church, the children of God. Woe to the children of the latter part of the 20th century. That's all of us, right? Every one of us. So it's been an important story to get out, and I hope you guys have been enjoying it. That said, I want to start with something that just came up today. The Pope is going to consecrate the USCCB, the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops, is going to consecrate the United States to the Sacred Heart of Jesus on the solemnity of the Sacred Heart, which is June 27th. So that'll be coming. It's just for those that don't know, the solemnity is always 19 days after Pentecost. It's after Pentecost, and it's the Friday after the Feast of Corpus Christi, which is the soul, body, and divinity of Christ. We celebrate the Eucharist. And it's also commemorating the end of the Jubilee year for Saint Margaret Mary, who had these apparitions. It's 350th anniversary, and it's a special Jubilee for her. And the Jubilee's theme is, of course, to return love for love. So it's and it has become and is the cornerstone of Pope Leo's papacy. So now we've got the whole thing. We've got everything coming into play, and I'm so pleased to see this, because we've got so much happening in the church that hopefully it becomes a voice again that people won't rebuff so quickly. But keep the church, the Holy Church, in your prayers. It is God's church. It doesn't go away. So this got put out on X the other day. I'm not saying who. It was put out on X talking about the Rothschild loan, which I went through in the last, I believe the last video. I went through it completely in the video about the Rothschild loans. First of all, please remember the Rothschilds were never connected to the City of London. They are investment folks, but the loan that happened was in 1832, and the church paid it back before the end of the 1800s. Just going to point that out. And in fact, there was a secret deal or secret clause in that deal that said that the papacy or the Vatican could not, and this is before the Vatican became its own state. The Lateran Treaty didn't happen until 1929, so this is in the 1800s, 1832. In the Vatican, after the Napoleonic Wars, which I went through in the last show, after the Napoleonic Wars, they needed some money to help kind of settle things down around the church's properties. And they took this loan. There was a secret clause in there that said that they couldn't renegotiate the loan, which had evidently a higher interest rate. I think it was 5%. So, but it was paid off. It was paid off completely before the end of the 1800s. In context, for those that don't want to hear the truth, it was a loan that the British took out from the Rothschilds to pay for when slavery was abolished in the British, with the British, the slave owners needed to be compensated, so they took a Rothschild loan. That loan didn't get paid off until 2015. That's usury. So there is issues with the way the Rothschilds do their loans, but I don't think the Vatican comes close to being an issue. And a good heads up, the Q posts require that you actually look into things, okay? So what is this that they're pointing to? Rothschilds actually met with the Pope. This is Pope Francis in 2023. They're starting a Council for Inclusive Capitalism, and Linda Rothschild is the CEO of that foundation. So just because the Pope met with them, I don't honestly know where that's going so far. It's been kind of quiet, but the Pope himself had challenged governments to apply the principles of morality to business and investment practices. And of course, a lot of people just kind of rolled their eyes because you mean the Vatican, where all those scandals came from. So these organizations, he asked to commit to an action to create something more equitable, sustainable, and trusted with regards to economies. And this is where Linda Rothschild comes in. Is it a good group? Is it a bad group? I can't answer that. But here we have another assumption made, right? An assumption made that says because the Pope met with Linda Rothschild, that the ownership of the Holy See is still under the Rothschild's control. So the Council for Inclusive Capitalism, she actually initiated the partnership with Pope Francis in 2018. She shared her work with him and what he was doing. And the whole purpose is to move away from the moniker that greed is good. And if you saw the video intro while you're waiting for this channel, there's a comment made by Pope Leo that Elon Musk is going to be the first trillionaire. He said, what's that all about? If that's what makes things good, we're in trouble, he says. So just as a way to look at how things are happening around the world, men are flawed, right? And as a result of those flaws, possessions become the thing you go after. So I just wanted to go through that as well. Yes, I know exactly what they say about assumptions, sober lady. That's why I have to giggle. So here again, I brought this slide back in to remind people that this loan in 1832 was 400 lira, and it was for 5%. And like I said before, it had that secret agreement in it. What is issue here is Torlonia. Torlonia was an Italian banker who, because the Pope needed the money, Torlonia Torlonia actually negotiated with the Rothschilds for that loan. He wasn't part of the Vatican. He was just an Italian banker. And when they figured out that there was some wonky deals in there, he asked Cardinal Tosti to renegotiate the loan. And Cardinal Tosti had actually come up with 6 Persian banks that were willing to do that. And that's when the Rothschilds came in. They got wind of it and they said, hey, wait a minute. So they were returning to what is known as throne and altar politics, which is another, it's an historical system, if you will, of governance where the monarchy or the throne and the church, the altar, are allied with each other. And that's historically how it had always been. Obviously that ended, but nevertheless, now you've got that whole loan detail. And I would like to see when people put out the half information, now that you have a little bit more under your belt, if you can kind of correct the record. I think it's time to start doing that. Please. It would be great. Another one, Catholics for Catholics, put out, congratulations, Real Candace Owen, and to her loyal husband, George. The two of you have faced great attacks for speaking truth to power and are now the #1 podcast in the world, which isn't true, by the way. They weren't the #1 podcast. When you look into Catholics for Catholics, you find Michael Flynn is on the board, as is Bishop Strickland, who, if you recall, Bishop Strickland was removed from ministry by Fernandez last year. And then you've got Colonel Harold Ziegler. Why all the why the military? Got 2 generals here. So I'm just real curious with this. I don't know where it's going. But Candace Owen is talking about how she's being eviscerated by many on the right for her views about Charlie Kirk, and they're congratulating her. So I don't know where that's going. Just want to bring it to your attention, because Catholics for Catholics is attached to Legionnaire of Christ. Legionnaire of Christ is where Father Messiel comes from. Father Messiel had abused more than 60 young boys. So here's John Yep. John Yep came from Legionnaires of Christ, and he's now the CEO of Catholics for Catholics. So we got an interesting dichotomy starting to build here. So again, bringing it up. I don't know what else to say about it. We have to wait and see. Father Messiel, by the way, died in 2008. Pope Benedict had forced him to retire in 2006, and he died in 2008. So you can go where you want to go with that. And then finally in 2010, 2 years after his death, Legionnaire of Christ actually acknowledged that he committed those reprehensible actions, including the sexual abuse. So there's been allegations going back back in 2005, 2006 about this, but everybody kind of glossed over it. In fact, he's quoted as saying, when John Paul II dies, I am going to be in big trouble. Yeah, he was. So there was a book written about all of this, by the way, about the reform that was going on. So there was a whole reform effort started by Pope Benedict, which I've outlined. I'm not going there, Jax. I have no clue what she is, and I don't find that to be a conversation worthy of having. Sorry. So remember, we've got Cardinal Sodano, who's connected to Cardinal McCarrick, and this all comes out because you've got all the memos that have come out about McCarrick. You already know about McCarrick, and you know about Sodano, and they're connected to, obviously, they're connected to the scandals that are going on in the church. And this is Kupich, who's a cardinal in the U.S. He's being censored, and he's the center of the controversy within the hierarchy right now, as a matter of fact. He is the guy that replaced McCarrick, who kind of doesn't remember sleeping in the same bed. So He said he would never do it now, though. So we'll have to see where this goes, because Cardinal Kupich, if you remember, was going to give a Lifetime Achievement Award to Dick Durbin, who's a rabid pro-abortion person. And Pope Leo said, these are complex and I don't know the whole story. He just did that video a couple weeks ago. So keep going down. We've got Kupich is also connected to McCarrick, as I said. So, there's still some cleaning out that has to be done. Still quite a bit of cleaning out that needs to be done. Keep going. Pope 547, we got Pope with Holocaust survivors. What is this about? And I'm looking forward to getting into this, because he stated, this is going into Pope Leo XII. Pope Leo XII was the Pope during World War II. He was scandalized, called him the Hitler's Pope, as a matter of fact. And in fact, do I see it? Yeah. Oops. There you go. There you go. There's books now have been written. This is by a non-Catholic, wrote this one, The Pope's Jews. And then there's this book called The Vatican's Secret Archives, which also used, when the Pope gave these journalists access to the archives to do the research, he told them, you need to write about it. And these guys put a whole chapter, it's the last chapter in the book, and it's the silence of Pope Pius XII. So you got Pope Pius XII being scandalized by the media, and we're going to get into that today, because he was anything but scandalous. Okay, I just got a message and I got to figure out what he's saying. Just give me a second. Oh, okay. I am accidentally going live on Pilled. Okay, not anymore. So anyway, what Q is getting at with these posts, if you notice, this is 2018. These books came out after that, by the way. Pope Francis had said that in fact, several popes have wanted to beatify Pope Pius XII, but every time they tried to put him through the process, there was a lot of outcry because he was supposedly pro-Hitler, anti-Jew, and put Jews at risk, which is not true. So I'm going to go into that story today. This Pope Pius XII has a rich history. And again, we got the Pope with the Holocaust survivors. This is, like I said, this is Post 547. He kisses the hands of the Holocaust survivors. I'm just going to go through a couple of things. The Pope had made a comment, Pope Francis, "Never again, Lord, never again," he said in the dimly lit hall of remembrances. He also said, earlier became the first to lay a wreath at the tomb of Theodor Herzl, seen as the founder of the modern Zionism that led to Israel's foundation. For all of those that are anti-Israel, please keep in mind there's a strategy that's going on. And I'm going to take it a step further here. He's the attacks on Jews are anti-Semitic, as are attacks on Israel. This is what Pope Francis told the Jewish leader. This post 545 is from that article, and he says that an outright attack on the state of Israel is also anti-Semitism. There may be political disagreements between governments and on political issues, but the state of Israel has every right to exist in safety and prosperity. You never hear that. Everybody talks about we wanted to end this war in Gaza. The fact is they had every right to live safely. These are the people that are at that meeting. And look who's there, the chairman of the board, David D. Rothschild. This is from 2018. So you've got the people from that Latin American Jewish Conference are there. Keep going, and I just overlaid that post 935 with the bishops with the half-hearted Heil Hitler. These are all these bishops. This is from Germany. This picture is taken in Germany. Catholics were, and a lot of people don't know this, but it wasn't just Jews that went to the concentration camps. Many Catholics went to concentration camps, as did anybody that dissented against the Hitler regime. Many Catholics did. At the time, in the polls, non-Catholics were quite satisfied with the government leading the narrative. Catholics fought against that, so many of them were rounded up right along with the Jews. And the persecution against Catholics was pretty strong. And what the Pope is saying here is, and this is again 2018, look at the date, and this is when the Pope said he was going to open up the Vatican archives so that research could be done. And I've said this before, the Vatican archives are not secret. In fact, he just changed the name. Pope Francis changed the name to the Vatican Apostolic Archives to get rid of the confusion. Secrete means private. The archives are private. They belong to the Vatican. And if you want access to them, you have to apply to gain access and let them know what you're researching. Same thing as if you were to come to my house and go through my library. You better ask first. And it's the same thing at the Vatican. The papal archives, the Pope's private archives, are kept in the papal apartments. They're not even in the papal archives that these people went through are in the Castle of the Holy Angels, which is about a mile down the road. But they've got all of the archives there. It's a huge setup. But there is a set of secret archives, private archives, which are kept in the papal apartments. And the documents that are kept there are the documents of the Pope only, are the workings of the church and documents of the Pope. And those documents, when a Pope dies, they're usually kept under seal for 25 years. But unless there's something else going on, which he'll show, because here we had Pope Leo, the night after he was made Pope, opened up the papal archives for the first time since 2013. Pope Francis never lived in the papal apartments. He always stayed in the guest house. And so Pope Leo opened up the papal archives. What that is to signal for me is that the investigations are largely over. So the reigning Pope's personal papers remain private until after his death for a set period, usually about 25 years. Given allegations of leaks, and for example, Vati leaks from 2012, access is tightly controlled, likely limited to the Pope's private secretary and select aides. So just know there is a set of private archives. Now, why would Pope Francis not live there? Well, knowing that these are the Pope's papers on his governance of the papacy, of the Holy See, and knowing that the Vatican had joined Interpol in 2008, seems to me that if you're going to have Interpol going through your papal archives, doing investigations, I don't think the Pope wants to live there during that. So the seals were removed on May 8th. And now we've got the Pope will be moving back into the papal residence. And these are pictures. They're saying that there needs to be quite a bit of work done on the papal apartment. This looks pretty beautiful to me. It doesn't look like it's in disrepair at all, but that's what they're saying. And these are the only pictures that were put out that I could find. These pictures don't look like the papal apartments are in disrepair. In fact, looks bootyful to me. We'll see. I don't know when he moves in. So let's get into Pope Pius XII. One of the things about Pope Pius XII that a lot of people don't know is he actually had a prophecy back in 1933, and he said that and it had to do with the message from Sister Lucia from Fatima, and he said that the dangers that threaten the church, as given to her, were to be catastrophic for the church. And because he was derided as Hitler's pope, nobody was really listening to anything. They didn't go back and review any of his works. In 2009, Pope Benedict did declare him venerable, meaning he's recognized as having led a heroic life. But we needed more than that. And here he said, this is from Pope Pius XII, the day will come when the civilized world will deny its God, when the church will doubt as Peter doubted. She will be tempted to believe that man has become God, that God's Son is only a symbol, a philosophy just like any other. In the churches, Christians will seek in vain for the red lamp where Jesus waits for them. Those that aren't Catholic, the red lamp is there's a candle that sits beside the tabernacle. When the lamp is lit, means Christ is in the tabernacle. If it's not lit, then the tabernacle is empty. So the red lamp where Jesus waits for them. Like the sinful woman weeping before the empty tomb, they will cry out, where have they taken him? And believe it or not, that has started happening in many churches. They removed the tabernacle from the altar, put it in a side estuary. When Pope Benedict came to the United States in 2007, he ordered that the tabernacles be replaced to the altar. But it had been years since the tabernacle had been on the altar. They've moved it off over the years. So the prophecy from Pope Leo XII is something worth looking into. Where does this come from? This information started coming out with these two books that I just showed you, where they looked into the archives and they found, oh my goodness, the information about Pope Leo was politicized, propagandized, and it was designed to go after Pope Leo. It was designed in the end also to put a mar against the church. But they didn't want Pope Leo because of what he meant to communism. And he corrected history, authors debunk myths tied to church controversies. They say in the book, this one, Vatican Secret Archives, have the humility to accept that you don't know as much as you think you do. Be open to new information and weigh it. Look for people's vested interests or motives and go out of your way to talk to people who think differently. Okay, it is generally accepted that Pope Pius XII was Hitler-esque. He was not. They looked into so many things. They went back to the Inquisition. They looked into Galileo. The last chapter of this book is about Pope Pius XII. Where does this all come from? There's so much more. The book is a great book. This is the other book, The Pope's Jews. This is written by Gordon Thomas. And he too went to the Vatican, went through those documents, and he said this revolutionary account of how the Vatican saved thousands of Jews during World War II shows why history must exonerate Hitler's Pope, using the air quotes, right? He was accused, if you recall, of Hitler. There's a couple of things, but Hitler tried to come into Italy. There was a Saturday massacre planned where they were going to round up the Jews, and he got them out of Rome, hid many of them, as many as he could find. He hid them so that Hitler didn't have them. In fact, at one point, Hitler actually talked to his generals about invading the Vatican, which the generals in Italy were like horrified that Hitler would consider doing that, so it never materialized. But yeah, this also brings back the whole Hitler-esque area where the period of time that accused the church was really propaganda. So priests were instructed to issue baptism certificates to hundreds of Jews in Genoa and Rome and other places around Italy. More than 2,000 Jews in Hungary were given fabricated Vatican documents identifying them as Catholics. Does this sound like a Hitler-esque pope? And a network of Catholics saved the German Jews by bringing them to Rome. In fact, at the end of one of the books, I know Revelation that I bought, when it was found out just what Pope Pius XII did, one of the leading Jews actually changed his website and puts up all of this information up there with a full apology, because he believed the rhetoric. That tells you how strong it gets. He believed the rhetoric that Pope Pius XII was anti-Jew, pro-Hitler, and he actually apologized heavily for being a part of the rhetoric that was slamming the Catholic Church for this. So, and this guy, Gordon Thomas, this book, it's actually he does a really good job. Where the other two guys did a whole chapter, this guy did a whole book on just this. It came out in, hold on, it came out right around the same time as the other one, but came out in 2017. So this is what Q is getting at in these posts. People have a biased opinion that's not based in fact, and that's what these posts are talking to. Like I said, the Vatican Secret Archives. The guy who helped all of these journalists do the research was by the name of Father Gumpel. Turns out he's not Father Gumpel. He's Hohenzollern. I cannot say it. Hohenzollern. He was German. The Hohenzollern family were royalty in Germany. They were overthrown. It's what brought in the Weimar Republic. So they were overthrown as a result of all of this. So his family, he took up the name Gumpel, and he was committed to getting the truth out about Pope Pius XII. Father Gumpel never told me exactly why he changed his name, but he hinted that it had something to do with his family. The Nazis were in power and were watching, is what he says. So yeah, there's a lot of people committed to getting the truth out, and he did it under an assumed name. Here you've got Sister Lucia with Cardinal Bertone. I showed you Cardinal Bertone. There's a lot of questions about his legacy as Secretary of State, number 2 in the Vatican. But what's interesting is she was ordered by the Pope to write down the secrets. And when she gave the 3rd secret, she brought it to the Vatican in about 1958-ish. And she said that it had to be opened by 1960. When they asked her why, she said, because it will become more understood. And she didn't know. She said that it was an inspiration that came over here, that it had to be opened by 1960, because it would be clearer then. And so instead of releasing the secret in 1960, they kept it until after Pope John Paul II was the attempted assassination. And they released it in 1982, saying the assassination attempt was the fulfillment of the 3rd secret. And those of us that have followed Fatima all these years said, well, how would that have been clearer in 1960? Something was up. So if the 3rd part of the secret, if not Russia, if people didn't mend their ways, if not, Russia will spread her errors throughout the world, causing wars and persecutions of the church. The good will be martyred. Holy Father will have much to suffer. Various nations will be annihilated. As a matter of fact, Czechoslovakia is no longer a country, right? And you've got all kinds of movement. But keep in mind, there was something else that happened in 1960 that I think is really interesting, because Pope Pius XII is the story. So one of the things to remember is that there was extreme activity. What is she talking about? Russia will spread her ills. She's talking about communism. We know that communism was spreading throughout Europe, and in fact even into the Western Hemisphere. Well, here's the interesting thing, because there was a campaign by the Russians at the time, USSR's Russians, to defame Pope Pius XII. They actually called the program Operation Seat 12, right there. And that was signed in 1960 by Khrushchev. So the whole purpose was to posthumously defame Pope Pius XII, call him a Nazi sympathizer, and get the passive observer during the Holocaust linked to that. So anybody that wasn't paying attention. And despite any accounts hailing him for his efforts to help the Jews, what they were doing was making sure that the narrative never said that. So what started it was this play called The Deputy. The Deputy was a play written by a German playwright, which was about all of this, and it painted Pope Pius XII as somebody that was anti-Jew. This comes out in the book, The KGB and the Vatican. That book is also very good. The revelations about the operation actually came out in 2007 in that book. Now there's a wiki on it, but at the time there wasn't. So Mihai Pacepa, I think his name is, he was a former Romanian spy chief who wrote about this in the book. So the outlets all around the world channeled what the Russian propaganda was saying, but the truth is none of it was actually real. And this is the book, and what's interesting is the CIA analyzed the book. There it is right here. It's reviewed by John C., and there's the rest of it. They did 3 pages, and the guy that did the reviewing is the CIA's Directorate of Operations. That's the clandestine service of the CIA. So here you have interesting timing, right? This book comes out, Sean and Brennan, and the CIA is reviewing the book. Looking for narratives, maybe? But that was reviewed in 2022. Yes, Catholic University Press of America, 2022, and it's a part of the KGB and the Vatican. Is a 103-page long book, or the index that they looked through. So Catholic and anti-Catholic traditions in Russia are a big deal. One of the problems that Russia had, and they had to be careful, is of course they don't want any religion. And Catholicism was very strong, whether it's Eastern or Roman, both were in Russia at the time. They had to get rid of that. Well, they could control the Eastern Orthodox because the state was involved, but not the Catholic, because the Pope elevates people. So it's historical. Most of them, obviously, the Roman Catholic adherents were opposed to the Russian Orthodox adherents, and so you had the nationalist sentiments, where the Russian Orthodox tend to be more nationalist, where the Catholics were not. The Roman Catholics were not. So after the Soviet era, there's a resurgence of Catholicism in Russia. In fact, Putin rebuilt most of the churches in Russia, but they still face a lot of challenges, including legal restrictions on on evangelization in Russia. That still goes on. Most of Europe, though, by the time the USSR fell, the anti-Catholic sentiment had already spread throughout Europe. And today, they're looking at blending both Western and Russian cultural influences. They're trying to find an identity within Russia and across Europe now. So these are things that are happening since then. But it still comes out. This is from 2003. Catholics need not apply. No church need apply. These are articles, cartoons by Thomas Nest. Thomas Nest, you'll see here in a moment, but he's, can a practicing Catholic be appointed a U.S. federal court judge? It's 2003. I don't know if you recall, but when Kennedy ran for office, the big question asked is, how can a Catholic be in the White House? But he must have appealed because he won handily. So, but the anti-Catholic sentiment went from Europe and is now in the Western Hemisphere, and that it's prevailed. This is from an article, a cartoon from Harper's Weekly from 1875. Catholics need not apply. And here we are in June of 2003. Catholics still need not apply. So again, where does this go? This is from the article is, I think it's New York Times. New York Times put this out. I have to look. I'm pretty sure this was the New York Times that put this article out. The Holocaust play that helped the Roman Catholic Church reject anti-Semitism. What this is saying is the play, The Deputy, because of what came out in the play, as you know, our movies are always so true. What they're saying is, because of what came out in the play, the church was embarrassed and finally rejected anti-Semitism. The play had then become so ingrained in popular culture that there was no getting the truth out about Pius XII. So when Pope Francis began to explicitly question, yes, I mentioned that, Jane. I did mention that. When Pope Francis began to explicitly question the idea of canonizing Pope Pius XII, you've got media around the world. Like I said, this is from 2017. It was a lie then. It's still a lie today. It was a lie when The Deputy was published. But they're referring to the movie, The Deputy, and painting the Catholic Church as anti-Semitic, and which has never been true. And the reason why that came out is because Pope Francis had really put effort into putting Pope Pius XII through the canonization process. And because of this, he opened up the archives so that reporters could do their own research. And the agreement to open up the archives, they could research any of the things they asked for, but they had to write about Pope Pius XII. And like I said, what I find interesting is the guy that wrote this book is not even Catholic. And he wrote, as you can see, it's not a small book, right? It's a very good book, but it's not a small book. Very easy to read too, by the way. But nevertheless, now we've got people looking into this because the fact that Pope Francis wanted to beatify Pope Pius XII and got so much blowback from that, he decided we have to slow down or halt the process for Pope Pius XII. And then these books came out, and I don't know where it's at right now. To be very honest, I have no idea what's going on. But there are two people that are mentioned in The Deputy that I wanted to bring up. Father Bruno Wustenberg, he was at the Vatican Secretariat of State office. He had a grudge against Pope Pius XII as the Pope had, in his view, hindered his career due to his alleged, I'm using air quotes, alleged homosexual tendencies in his worldly lifestyle. He was very, let's just say, free. He was well known for racing along the streets of Rome in a red Porsche. Where do you get the money for a Porsche as a priest? His career advanced under Pope Pius VI pontificate when he became an archbishop and apostolic pronuncio to Japan in 1973. And then there's Bishop Hudel, who was a pro-Nazi bishop in Rome, an advocate for National Socialism. He was a member of the Third Reich intelligence. He was an agent for them. After the war, he organized the escape of war criminals, people like Eichmann, Mengele, Klaus Barbie. They all went to South America. It was this bishop that organized the escape. So, like I said, the anti-Catholic sentiment in Russia now is not just permeated into Europe, but it became very much, it saturated even the United States or the Western Hemisphere. So the efforts by the Soviet Union, so what did our mothers say? Russia would spread her ills unless we consecrated. So this was all pure fiction, but it's still to this day, many people believe it to be true, despite proof otherwise. So I wanted to bring up this because one of the things that globalists hate is the impact. These are slides I showed in a previous show. They hate the impact of the Vatican on diplomacy. And I was bringing this up because Pope Paul VI in 1965 had started talking to the Russian foreign minister. And when Pope John Paul II became Pope, he immediately started meeting with the Russian foreign minister. And 2 years after the last visit, USSR fell, the Berlin Wall fell. So we've got a process here that shows the Vatican and its diplomatic efforts over a period of time has been very strong. And this is one of the things that the Russians couldn't stand because they knew the Pope carried weight around the world. And like I said, when the Pope made his first international visit was to Poland, he is a Polish Pope, in 1979. Look at all these millions, right? A year later, we got the Solidarity push, which, by the way, some of the money used for Solidarity came from our own CIA. Our own CIA at the time had been funneling money in through that's where the Franklin National Bank comes in, that's where Ambrosiano Bank comes in, and the Institute of Religious Works comes in. The RCIA was funneling money to try to stop communism in Italy. Obviously, they went rogue after that. That brings us to this. And I wanted to point this one out because this is post 4799 from September 30th of 2020. And they're saying that Pompeo is rebuffed by the Vatican because of the Pope supposedly said that it was too close to the election. It was inappropriate for him to meet the Pope. Francis declined to see Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, who was demanding a harder Vatican line on China. Key thing, the Holy See said meeting just before a U.S. election would be inappropriate. Here, an indignant Vatican took the article more as a calculated affront because what Pompeo did, which is interesting, I'll show that to you, what Pompeo did was write an article in a periodical that's not normally viewed by Catholics. It's conservative, but it's not viewed typically by Catholics. I'll show it to you in the next one. Chastising the Vatican, which I find interesting that he would do this. This is the article that Pompeo wrote. This is the guy that runs this periodical is anti-Catholic. He also said that Pope Francis was a failure as a pope. He also wrote an article about John Bolton, who is the man behind the Trump Z allegations. So going back to this one, Pompeo's choice to publish in First Things, a conservative Christian magazine, Evangelicals more like it, that has called Francis a failure as Pope also mattered, according to Cardinal Parolin, who is the Secretary of State under Pope Francis and currently under Pope Leo, but I believe that'll be changing within a year. Q asked the question, when does the church become a playground, a business? When does it become political? When does it become corrupt? When does it become willfully blind? When does it become controlled? the diplomatic efforts. It's a diplomacy trap. All of that fits in under diplomacy. And I'm pointing this out because it's interesting that Pompeo is trying to go meet the Pope, supposedly. And this article is written before he goes. He's rebuffed by the Pope, and supposedly over China. So let me point out what he did do in China. He did meet. He met with Cardinal Parolin on October 1st, September 30th and October 1st. Met on 2 days. Of particular concern about the situation in China. Interesting. The end the suffering in Venezuela. Talking about Lebanon. Talking about Israel. Talking about the UAE, Bahrain, and peace efforts in the Middle East, as well as what's going on in Belarus. So here we go, looking at our Secretary of State meeting with the Secretary of State at the Vatican. They're peer-to-peer, right, which is what you would normally do. And Parolin is the guy that he went to see. He didn't go to see the Pope. He's talking diplomacy. What's interesting is Parolin is the architect of the China deal, where the Vatican has a secret agreement. It's Parolin that has this agreement, and he said, and it's been renewed every year, year over year. And this last time, 24, it was extended for another 4 years instead of the usual 2 years. It was extended. It won't expire until 28. But he is who met with Pompeo, so it's over China. Parolin was undersecretary at one point, so he's got a lot of diplomatic background. And I think if you're looking at what was Pompeo doing there, remember the Uyghur story? The news about the Uyghur story, the architect of the Uyghur story is none other than John Bolton. Don't you find that interesting? So he being the architect of the Uyghur story, this is Trump just made a deal with China. And this is a Republican effort. U.S. lawmakers confront China's brutal war on faith with tough sanctions bill. It's a Democrat that is saying, hey, if you're going to make a deal with China, use this three-piece, this triple play, he calls it. One would be stability in the trading relationship. A second would be making sure that we do something about their practice of dumping. It's, and third, concrete steps to lower the export of fentanyl precursors, which just today, Kash Patel came out and said that fentanyl coming into our country from China is over, which we knew about from a hearing that Kash Patel had been working with his counterpart in China to get rid of that, to go after the entities that were producing the precursor drugs. So now that's over. And this guy, a Democrat, is laying this out. Yet a Republican is saying, the Uyghurs, obviously warmongering. But the architect of the entire Uyghur story is John Bolton, because, he's worth talking to, right? As he's casually seen walking down the street, as he's casually talking about doing, what is it? He has been a part of coups. Let me just play this.
In fact, one doesn't have to be brilliant to attempt a coup.
I disagree with that. As somebody who has helped plan coup d'etat, not here, but other places, it takes a lot of work.
You cited your expertise having planned coups.
I'm not going to get into the specifics, but
successful coups?
Well, I wrote about Venezuela in the book, and it turned out not to be successful. Not that we had all that much to do with it, but I saw what it took for an opposition to try and overturn an illegally elected president, and they failed. The notion that Donald Trump was half as competent as the Venezuelan opposition is laughable. But I think there's another...
I feel like there's other stuff you're not telling me about.
I'm sure there is.
In fact, one doesn't have...
Okay, so remember, Pompeo's meeting with Parolin. Parolin and he talked about not just China, but you see the suffering in Venezuela. What do you think? You think maybe Pompeo was getting information about that would either back up or impugn Bolton? Could be, right? Sure does look interesting, especially given all the places Bolton's been. So nevertheless, I wanted to point that out. That's that post about diplomacy trap, and here we are actually working with the Vatican on these diplomatic issues.
In fact, one doesn't.
I want to point out that Bertone was Pope John Paul II's Secretary of State. When Cardinal Ratzinger became Pope Benedict, he kept Bertone. Bertone stayed on with him through the entirety of his papacy. Remember, Pope John Paul and Cardinal Ratzinger were very close. It was a year after Pope Francis became Pope before he replaced Bertone with Cardinal Parolin. I venture that it'll be about that same time frame before Pope Leo replaces his Secretary of State, and I venture this bishop, what is it, Ilson Montanari? He was his number 2 down in South America. I venture he's going to bring him in to be his number 2 into the Vatican. And why would he wait a year? Well, you're talking diplomacy, you're talking Secretary of State, you're talking front-facing with the world from a diplomatic perspective. You're going to want to make sure you get as much of a brain dump as possible before you move on. And I think that's where we're at. Jane, by the way, thank you for the $5. I greatly appreciate it. So I'm going to bring back something about Cardinal Pell because that even feeds into more of my story today. Cardinal Pell, as you recall, had been arrested, convicted, went to prison for a crime he didn't commit. And after he'd been in jail about 18 months, 3-panel judge in Australia reviewed the whole file and completely exonerated him. And I'm bringing this up because of its connection to Betsu. The reason why this is important is when Pope Francis first became Pope, first thing he did was set up the Council of 9 Cardinal Advisors. Cardinal Pell was a part of that. Cardinal Pell was a financial wizard and had started to find incidences of money laundering and all kinds of other things going on at the Vatican Bank. And the more he told the Pope, the worse it got. And Betsu, who was number 2 at the Secretary of State in the office, there's 3 offices, he's in office 1, he was funneling money. So Betsu then funnels $3 million, a little over $3 million down to Australia. I'm sorry, $1.3 million down to Australia to frame Cardinal Pell, and it worked. The panel removed or gave full commutation of the charges and the crime to Cardinal Pell in April of 2020, which a lot of people flipped out on. There was a real reason why they ended up overturning everything, and I explained this in a previous show. The victim, I'm using air quotes, said that Cardinal Pell had abused him in the sacristy after Mass. And I challenged Catholics to go take note. In the sacristy after Mass, the priest, as long as he's in the Mass garb, cannot be left alone. That's canon law. Cannot be left alone. Somebody has to always be escorting him because he's still in the person of Christ. And so the flaw that happened with Cardinal Pell is the jury and the courts did not know that tradition of the church, and as a result, they convicted him on a crime he could not have possibly committed. And remember, when he was going through his trial, he was prevented from even defending himself. I'm sure that would have come out had he done that, but he couldn't even defend himself. But it's a big deal because we're talking about Betsu. And right before he's fully exonerated, I think these are connected, by the way, right before he's exonerated in October of 2019, there's a raid at the Secretariat of State. There's a notice put out. These 5 people were not allowed any access to the Secretariat of State. It was a big deal. And the 2 people that did it ended up quitting that same day. This was the notice that was put out. It's obviously in Italian, but the notice that was put out on that raid, they raided the Office 1 of the Secretary of State. That's the Vatican Bank. That's the Vatican Lakes. That's all of that. So it was highlighting something that was going to happen. Most significantly, the abrupt ending in 2017 of the first external audit of the Vatican. So you have a guy, Cardinal Pell was then the prefect for the economy. He was the secretary for the economy. It was a new position that they helped put together that is now in the Vatican Constitution, the new Constitution. And Malone, which we'll talk about here in a minute, did a series of audits. And they started to find all this stuff. And as they're finding it, not only is Pell framed to get him out of there, but Malone is also framed to get out of there. The day of the raid, this guy here he was the guy that was brought in to do audits externally. He's from Egmont Financial Services Group. He quits the day of the raid. He's out of there. In the crime of the century, the trial of the century held at the Vatican, he was actually charged. I think he got 6 months in jail for withholding information. And then, of course, Domenico Gianni, who in the Q post with the owl is the papal bodyguard, personal bodyguard. He quit, but he didn't leave office until the middle of October, right around the same time that Pompeo and Durham went to Italy, by the way. Just going to point that out. I can't prove it, but I just find the timing interesting. As you know, Cardinal Pell was exonerated, full commutation. In 2014, Pell says his department found millions of euros in Vatican dicasteries tucked away off balance sheets. The amount consisted of 94 million euros in the Secretary of State, later followed up by the discovery of nearly €1 billion in various other dicasteries. In 2016, the Vatican Secretary of State announced suspension of its first external audit of the Vatican without consulting Cardinal Pell. So they tried to, so the Vatican Secretary of State, this is Bertone and Bessieux, number 1 and number 2, at the Secretary of State. They were trying to prevent the audit from happening. I wanted to point these out because then he wanted all the assets moved to the APSA as part of a process of stripping the powers that had been given to the Vatican Secretary of State. So we can keep going through. In 2017, they unilaterally tell the Vatican departments to display information to an outside auditor, a move rejected by Cardinal Pell. That's Egmont Financial Services Group, and the Auditor General, Libero Malone, who ended up having to leave as well. And then by February 24th of 2019, his 5-year mandate as a prefect for the Secretary of the Economy had been expired. He was actually headed to jail by then. And like he said, he always maintained his innocence the whole time. This is his public accounting. He had health crisis, so a lot of people knew he wasn't going to go back into leadership. However, another thing came out. There was a legal gag on the Cardinal Pell trial in Australia. Yet the media breached that gag, obviously to taint the jury pool, right? So they actually admitted it finally that they breached the legal ban. The media company in Australia that did most of the talking was ABC down there. I don't know if it's any Australian Broadcasting Corporation, but they're funded by the Australian government, although they claim their independence of government and partisan politics, but they're funded like NPR, right? So, and I can tell you there are people to this day that are absolutely sure that Cardinal Pell is guilty. In fact, somebody I talked to said, I know somebody who knows somebody that was abused by him. So in this person's head, Cardinal Pell is guilty because the wrap-up smear worked. And it did get him convicted. And what Bessu sought to do, what Bertone sought to do, was to get Cardinal Pell out of there, and it worked. So when the whole thing was reversed, there were two accusers. One of them had committed suicide. This other one, when they confronted him and said, hey, what is your part in this? He said, I was never bribed. But we know $1.3 million was funneled down there to get rid of Pell. So he originally made his accusations in like 2015. And like I showed you, the investigation against Pell started soon after that, a couple months later. After this is done, you've got the raid at the Vatican. You've got the Pope is naming a civilian to be the head of the Secretariat of the Economy, the new position that Cardinal Pell designed with the new Constitution. And in August of 2020, he names Caballero to be the head of the Secretariat of the Economy. He's still there. But what's interesting about him is that he lived in the U.S., and he had several senior financial management positions at a place called Baxter Healthcare. They get interesting. They make medical products. He was also the vice president of international finance. Guy's a financial whiz when you look into him. Baxter had been sued by the SEC of the United States for accounting improprieties. I can't help but wonder if Mr. Baxter was a whistleblower. Nevertheless, $192,000 was their fine by the SEC. And this is in 2022. So this is 2 years after he joins the Vatican Secretariat of State. After he's made the head of the Vatican Secretariat of State, the Pope brings Cardinal Pell back to the Vatican. And in my view, he brought him back so that he could bring the new guy up to speed. But for the official record, it was an interesting move that was made because of everything that had happened. Nobody expected him to go back to the Vatican. I don't know if you know, but he has since passed away. He died in 23, I believe. So here's another video.
I suppose I'm not particularly surprised by the decision of the High Court. Talking to people who are very much in the know, most expected that the conviction would be quashed.
Oops.
He's still got a lot of friends and a lot of supporters within the Vatican, and they would be very relieved that he's out of jail and that his conviction has been quashed. There would be some that would be a bit embarrassed by it all. They would be the ones who are perhaps more aware of the importance of the sexual abuse crisis in the Anglo world. I really don't think that there is any future for him, certainly in any leadership position in the Vatican, none whatsoever, really. The Australian Catholic Church is in a disastrous state with regard to leadership. Our bishops have been, in many ways, failures as leaders. The sexual abuse crisis has simply caught them wrong-footed almost every inch of the way.
Okay, so this is about Cardinal Pell being exonerated. He has a full commutation, and I totally agree with you, Keza. He was eviscerated by the government. In other words, somebody got paid by Bessieux and the clan in the Vatican to make sure that Cardinal Pell didn't get back to the Vatican. And if you just sit here and think for a minute, what would a cardinal have over the government of Australia? Unless, you remember the Q post where we're at a worldwide stalemate? Remember, everybody has something on everybody? Can you see it? I don't know if you can see it, but I do. That when I need a favor, I'm just going to say, remember that thing you did? I can hold over you. And it gets people doing a lot of things. On the 25th of September, Pope Francis did something unusual. He forced Bessieux out and, quote, removed the cardinal cap. And then a lot of people asked about it. And I remember when it happened. This is in 2020. I kept saying, this is a big deal, folks. By removing the cardinal cap, the only person that can discipline a cardinal is the Pope. When you take away the privileges of a cardinal, he can be tried in a Vatican tribunal. That's what he was setting him up to do. The very next day, he has Cardinal Pell returned to Rome. So there's more going on here. And Pope Francis was no stupid person, right? So here he is returning to Rome right after Cardinal Pell loses his hat. And then, as you know, Cardinal Pell, Bessieux ended up being found guilty. I am going to play this video. It's 5:21, but I really wanted to play it. Please bear with me. It does a perfect summary of everything I'm talking about. So here you go.
Francis issues new reforms for the Vatican Bank.
In 2015, Pope Francis made history by appointing the first ever Auditor General to the Vatican. After decades of financial mismanagement and scandals and lack of accountability, this would be someone who would oversee the Vatican's balance sheets to try and get a handle on the finances at the center of the Catholic Church. And the man chosen for the job, Libero Malone, a top financial auditor who had worked in Britain and the United States and had formerly been the chairman and CEO of Deloitte in Italy. Pope Francis wanted honesty, transparency, and reform across the Vatican. Cardinal George Pell, who at the time was head of the Vatican Secretary for the Economy, said the Auditor General had complete freedom to audit any Vatican accounts and would be answerable only to the Pope. But after only 2 years in the job, Libero Malone suddenly resigned. A resignation he claims he was forced to make. Why? Because he was starting to uncover financial irregularities in one of the Vatican's highest offices, linked to one of the most powerful cardinals, Angelo Becciu. When Malone pushed and tried to audit Becciu's accounts, he turned the tables and accused Malone of spying and overstepping his authority.
Cardinal Angelo Becciu, once a high-ranking Vatican official, now standing trial in the Vatican for embezzlement and fraud.
7 years later, that same Cardinal, Angelo Becciu, in 2023 was found guilty in a Vatican court of embezzlement and fraud after losing the Vatican over €100 million in a London real estate deal. Libero Malone, who claims his professional name has been blackened by this fiasco, launched a €9.3 million lawsuit against the Vatican. The claim was dismissed by the Vatican, but now Maloney is appealing. And in this rare one-on-one extended interview, I asked Maloney about what he saw when he first looked at the Vatican accounts.
And there were certain accounting records which were reasonable, others written in pencil on white pieces of paper.
And what happened, as he puts it, when he started to ask the wrong kind of questions.
But they're prying into our affairs. I said, no, they're not prying. No, we think we have to cancel this contract.
And when he did notice money was being misused, if he reported this to the Pope,
I told everything. He was my boss.
When the Pope heard these concerns of yours, what was his reaction?
He was overwhelmed.
So, why did you sign the letter of resignation?
I'm Colin Flynn, and this is an interview with former Vatican Auditor General Libero Maloney.
Libero Maloney, it is great to meet you and thank you for doing this interview.
Thank you for inviting me.
You have taken a case against the Vatican for 9.3 million euros for reputational damage, loss of income, emotional stress, loss of medical records and more. The case has been kicked out by the Vatican, but you're appealing it now. Before we talk about the case, 2015 was it, you became the Vatican's first Auditor General, appointed by Pope Francis.
That is correct.
What was your understanding of what your role was, or what your job was?
Well, first of all, it was going to be the first time that the Vatican named an Auditor General, and it was on the basis of the reforms that Pope Francis introduced. When they contacted me, I had some doubts because the history of the Vatican has always been uncertain in terms of financial issues, but they illustrated to me the new procedures that they were going to introduce and how the system would hopefully work. And I found it an interesting challenge because being a Catholic, it was an opportunity to contribute to my church in terms of helping with my professional background to address some of the issues that we're going to be facing. And since I was an auditor by profession, it seemed quite obvious that it could be something I could undertake.
So this wasn't just professional for you, this was personal as well.
It was also personal. I thought that it was an opportunity to contribute to my church.
What were you told? Were you told, no door is locked, all the documents are there for you to see, we'll have complete oversight and there will be transparency?
Well, first of all, they introduced to me before I started the new procedures they were going to be implementing, which were being led by Cardinal Pell, and I found that those procedures were very sound, and therefore would allow somebody to carry out audits. When I actually started work, I discovered that the history of the accounting was rather poor.
And it seems incredible, Liberal, that up until this point there had not been an Auditor General at the Vatican. When you think of the vast sums of money in the different departments and dicasteries, accountants, of course, but were there people checking the balances and was there oversight until that point?
There was a dicastery that looked at the financials, but there was more of a sort of what I would call an analytic review, as opposed to detailed auditing. So they would review the documents prepared by the single dicasteries, but they did not seem to address the full auditing procedures to back up the numbers that were being presented. So it was really a life change for the Vatican. It was a watershed, if you like, you know. We've been doing it in a particular way. We now need to get into the modern world. We need to progress with new procedures, new ways of doing it, and new ways of carrying out audits.
When we talk about the case, you mentioned a few times, coming up against the old guard who were opposed to the auditing that you were doing and the transparency you wanted. When you say
well, it's not me that wanted transparency. It was the Pope in the statute that had been prepared for the Auditor General, which listed the responsibilities and the duties, and those responsibilities required total transparency.
You're the one who had to enact it.
I had to implement it, and it was very difficult helping the people to move from where they were to where they needed to be. But you know, the resistances were significant in certain areas, well, not everywhere. A lot of the people were very helpful, and we were able to pursue our work well in several, 2 or 3 areas, it was much more difficult.
And those people who made it difficult for you, you claim ultimately led to you not being able to do your job. In fact, you being threatened and forced to resign in the end, which you didn't want to do, which has led to this reputational damage, loss of earnings.
Yes, I was forced to resign because they accused me of embezzlement and spying. None of the two things that I carried out, and maybe it confused what they were claiming with other work. In fact, Cardinal George Pell is on record in several interviews saying they didn't understand, the guy was just losing.
Because, again, they didn't have that kind of professional auditing at an international financial firm level coming into the Vatican and the Vatican accounts.
Yes.
You believe they might have mistaken that for espionage?
No, I think that they mistook espionage because I was actually checking accounting records in detail. And in doing so, I came across several or many issues which were incorrectly dealt with or treated, and what one would call misdemeanors. And therefore, they thought that by checking in detail some of the financial transactions, I was actually spying on the work they were doing. For example, in some cases they said I had been spying on a certain archbishop. Now, I wasn't spying on the archbishop, I was examining the accounting records of the entity he managed. And those records were being managed by that entity and by the archbishop, but I wasn't spying on the archbishop, I was examining the accounting records and finding errors.
When I interviewed the late Cardinal George Pell, I remember him when I asked him what the Vatican accounts were like when he came from Australia to oversee them. And he said, murky, he used the word murky, and there had been a lot of incompetence over the years. And then I asked him, what about criminality? When you saw the accounts and the balance sheets, what was your initial reaction?
I think the word that Cardinal Pell used, murky, is correct. You see, we had a lot of people managing financial documentation who had not been trained to do so. And therefore, it was very difficult for them to do things correctly, especially because they were being confronted by people who were trained to examine accounting records in a professional manner. And there were certain accounting records which were reasonable, others we found were written in pencil on white pieces of paper. And although the numbers were there, written in pencil on white pieces of paper, it doesn't give much satisfaction to an auditor.
What was your relationship like with Pope Francis initially, when he brought you in and you were doing the job?
I met with him every 3 or 4 weeks.
Wow, that frequently?
Yes. He wanted to be informed of the work we're doing. And we had meetings in Santa Marta, so they were very private meetings. He insisted on receiving documentation in advance. And then when I got to see him, he would interrogate me. It was very positive. He took an interest in what we were doing, and he wanted to know why I had raised the issue and what the solutions were.
And how frank were you with the Pope? When you said you were coming up against the old guard, they were opposing your work, would you relay that to the Pope?
I told everything to the Pope. He was my boss. I had to relate to him, and I had no reason not to tell him exactly what I was doing.
And what was his reaction? To listen or to say,
no, to listen, and there's several occasions, well, you go and tell him this, and I'll take care of this. And it was a constructive relationship. Until April the 1st, which is the last time I saw him, then for some reason they stopped me seeing him. Now, it wasn't something I agreed with him. It's that the following meeting I'd asked for towards the end of May, they told me that I had to go through an official channel to ask for an appointment. Because in the past, I'd just spoken to his secretary, said, look, I have these papers for the Pope, when can I see him?
So you would speak directly to the secretary?
Who would set up my appointment in a week in Santa Marta. This thing changed, and I continued relating to the Pope by sending him documents via his secretary, and his secretary sending me the Pope's comments back. So I think the relationship continued, except that for some reason somebody had stopped the meeting. Now, you can read into that whatever you want.
Would it have raised alarm bells with the Pope that he was seeing you once every 3 weeks, you had a good relationship, you were explaining things to him more than what was just on the paper, and then all of a sudden he's not having the meetings with you anymore?
I tried to connect with him. I don't know what his feelings were. I was very surprised what happened, but I had a mandate, so I continued on my work.
And around the world, the Pope's financial reforms were hailed, and they were seen as a great moment for the Vatican and a great moment in Pope Francis's papacy. When did you start to notice inside the walls of Vatican City, when you were doing your work, that things were starting to go south and they weren't going well?
Let's say that I can use a couple of examples. One is that in March of 2016, so several weeks before my last meeting with the Pope, I had a meeting with Archbishop Becciu of the Executive State and Monsignor Perlasca and Mr. Tirabassi to discuss the audit of the financial statements of the Executive State, Secretariat of State. And we had a meeting, and they showed me a piece of paper in which they had some 700 million worth of investments split between real estate and financial investments, and I asked for supporting documentation. And they started saying that it was going to be difficult to obtain the supporting documentation. I thought, if I don't have the supporting documentation, I can't do my other work. And they said, well, especially the property we have in England. I said, well, why should the lawyers withhold the information to you? I'm the General Auditor for the Vatican. I'm not an external person. You should be able to get the information. That information was never made available. Now, in 2019, when the Sloan Avenue debacle came up, I said to myself, well, now I know why, I raised the quail in the high grass. I started asking the wrong questions.
This is the London property that they had invested in and then thrown good money after bad and lost.
Several hundred millions.
But surely for you then,
But that was one example. The other example was that Cardinal Pell and the Council of Economy had agreed to name PricewaterhouseCoopers as the auditors for the Vatican.
The external auditors.
The external auditor, which had been decided even before I was chosen. Monsignor Becciu was getting a bit anxious because he called me one day and he said, what do you think about Pricewaterhouse carrying out the external audit? I said, well, it was a decision taken by the Vatican before I turned up. I have no comments to make. But they're prying into our affairs. I said, no, they're auditors, they're not prying. They're doing their work and they will report to whoever they have to report. And they said, no, we think we have to cancel this contract, which he then did without even informing the people who signed the contract, Cardinal Pell and the organization that had chosen the auditors, the Council of Economy.
So he would claim that they were overstepping the mark.
Yeah, but I discovered later what work they were doing. At that time, they were testing some of the steps that they would have done for the normal audits, which included obtaining confirmation from external third parties. And one of those confirmations was from banks. When I think they saw the detail of information required that the banks would have to give to the auditor, I think because of this value issue, they got more anxious and they thought it would be better not to have an external audit.
Because everything would have been on the table then, for you and then everyone to see. And in your lawsuit against the Vatican, you were saying that you were dismissed because of three main points. The first, the London property bill, you were starting to uncover documentation that was hinting at this huge scandal, which has since broken. Cardinal Angelo Becciu has been found guilty of embezzlement and fraud. And then the second one was that funds had been used in a questionable way to finance the extension and renovation of the head of the Vatican Police. And then the third one was bringing in those external auditors who you say again? Consultants might have uncovered a web of corruption and financial mismanagement at the highest levels of the Roman Curia.
Well, I didn't write that.
This is not your belief that there was corruption and mismanagement at the highest level?
No, I believe that there was corruption, but it wasn't part of my claim.
But because you were onto things, because you were starting to uncover...
Because I'd uncovered a number of things. Some were apparent to me, but I've written lots of reports to the Pope, in which I'd identified many strange transactions carried out by cardinals and archbishops, and I've kept these reserved with the Pope, and I'm not going to talk about them in detail.
This quote, cardinals putting money in their own pockets.
Yes.
But that is the same thing, isn't it? Financial mismanagement and corruption at the highest levels. If cardinals are taking money and putting it in their pockets.
Corruption can mean other things as well. What I meant was, they, instead of using money they were receiving for the benefit of the dicastery they were using, this money ended up in their own pockets. It doesn't mean that they were actually corrupting others.
But they were defrauding the department to which the money was meant to go to. Princes of the church, next in line to become pope, are lining their own pockets.
Yes, but it happened. And it was part of my reports to the Pope, in which I underlined these issues, and the Pope requested that these things be resolved.
When the Pope heard these concerns of yours and he saw the evidence that you were putting in front of him, what was his reaction?
He was overwhelmed. He didn't believe that this could happen. But I had all the detail, and he examined it and understood. And he also asked me to explain to the entities involved where the mistakes were, because they needed to rectify. In fact, the money came back.
So he took the approach that this was maybe just incompetence or misunderstanding, and then the money would be returned. If you explained to them, showed them the error of their ways.
That's the way of putting it, but you know.
Yeah, okay. Were you disappointed by that response?
No, my intention was that the monies that belong to the dicasteries have to be with the dicasteries, and that the spending which carried out was to be done in accordance to the rules.
Did you ever confront the cardinals about it and face to face?
Oh, where we discussed the issues, I told the cardinals what the mistakes were.
How did they react?
Maybe they didn't like it, but the money came back into the dicastery.
And are we talking hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands?
Several hundred thousand euros.
Several hundred thousand euros. The apartment, your office was within Vatican, wasn't it? The office you were working in.
Well, it was outside the walls, across the road.
But a Vatican apartment.
It was extra-territorial, yes.
How are you feeling? At the beginning of the interview, you mentioned that this not only was professional for you, but it was personal too. You're a Catholic, a man of faith, you wanted to give something back to your church. How was your view of the Catholic Church, your own faith? How was it affecting you when you saw what was happening inside the Vatican?
No, it didn't really affect me too much, because I met a lot of very nice people. If I would say 100 people, 95 were great people. It was just 5 that maybe were difficult and stubborn and difficult to get on with. So I did not have a negative view of the church.
When I asked Cardinal Pell as well, was it incompetence or criminality? And he said a bit of both. And one, if it's incompetence, you can teach people better accounting practices. But if it's criminality...
Oh, in my statute I had the opportunity to report to the promoter of justice and to the money laundering entity, IFA, as to things that we uncovered which needed their attention. So where we found issues which were in this context, I reported it to the entities, and it was up to them to follow up, except that I discovered they didn't follow up.
They didn't follow up. No. The day your office was raided, and then subsequently you were forced to sign a letter of resignation, but which I guess you didn't want to do, but you say they threatened you. What did they threaten you with?
Well, first of all, the day started in the morning by meeting Cardinal Becciu, who told me that the Pope lost faith in the work I was doing. So it was very strange. You can't speak to the Pope. He said, no, you can't speak to the Pope. You have to go and speak to the commander of the Vatican police.
When you said why, did he give you a reason? He said, why has he lost faith in my work?
I asked her why I couldn't speak to him. He said, no, you have to go and ask the commander of the police, Vatican police. So I was accompanied to the offices of the Vatican police, and they pulled out this what they call a criminal decree of of investigation against me, in which they described the work I was doing, and
saying you went against all the rules and were spying on the private lives of his superiors and staff, including me.
this is what Cardinal Becciu said when I met with him in the morning before I went to the gendarmerie. And the gendarmerie pulled out this document and they said that I was accused of embezzlement and spying. And they described the work I was doing, which wasn't true, or was incomplete. They only covered half sort of the statute that I was supposed to, the work I was supposed to be doing. And they said that I had to confess. I said, well, confess what? I've done nothing of what you're saying, you're wrong. And they pulled out 2 invoices to show that I was embezzling. And it was the consultant who had called in to check the bugs in my computer. Okay? And there were 2 invoices for 27,000. 1 October, 1 November of 2015. They showed me these 2 invoices that were photocopies, first of all. And I looked at them and I said, this is correct and this is wrong. And they said, why can you say that? I said, because that is approved by me and that isn't approved by me. They said, well, no, but it has the stamp of your office. I said, that has a stamp of my office and my signature. That has a stamp of my office and then scroll. So that document is false.
So why did you sign the letter of resignation?
Well, as I said, they accused me of these things. They interrogated me the whole afternoon. They took away all the documentation from the office. They also took away the documentation in my colleague's office, Ferruccio, who that day wasn't in the office. And to open his cabinets, they brought in the fire brigade to smash everything open, to take away his documents. And they kept on saying I had to confess. I said, well, I had nothing for me to confess, but they treated me, oh, if you don't confess, you don't know what harm will come to your family, we'll declare you to the fiscal police in Italy, all this sort of stuff.
So threatening you with physical violence in your family.
And at that point I said, what's the point of staying on here? So at 8:30 in the evening, so it was a long day, I said, I'm going to resign. I said, I called in my secretary to prepare a letter. No, we have it ready. The letter is ready for you to sign. But hang on.
Yeah.
So they went away and they brought back a letter, and they brought a letter which I was supposed to sign, and I looked at it and said, I'm not signing it. But you said you were going to sign a letter. I said, today is the 19th of June. This letter is dated the 12th of May. I said, I can't sign a letter dated the 12th of May. Oh, we made a mistake. I said, of course you made a mistake. They corrected it. So it was a plan. I had been framed. They corrected and I signed the letter and went home. And I didn't sleep for 3 months.
Did any part, before we talk about the impact this has had on you and your family, did any part of you worry about, because you're a tough auditor and you worked in big financial firms in London and you can be in the rough and tumble. I know this sounded horrific, but if you signed a letter of resignation, it could be seen by some as an admission that you did something wrong. They presented some evidence to you and you that day signed.
Well, that's what I tried to do. That's why after I left them, well, first of all, you need to know that I resigned on the 19th. In the morning of the 20th, Cardinal Parolin called me to ask me why I resigned. Now, he was the boss of Cardinal Monsignor Archbishop Becciu. So it was obvious that Cardinal Parolin had not been informed.
And you didn't hear from the Pope after that?
No, but Cardinal Pell spoke to the Pope, and I got the impression from Cardinal Pell that even the Pope was surprised. But I've never spoken to him. I've sent several letters to the Pope, hoping to meet with him, to explain. Yeah, but he's met people in the prisons, he's met all sorts of people in the world, but he hasn't met me.
Why do you think that is?
I think that they impeded him.
Did you feel vindicated in a way when you saw the conviction of Cardinal Angelo Becciu? The fact that he was
I was
found.
vindicated. I felt that the truth was coming out, that the work that we'd done had highlighted that there were issues that needed to be addressed, and that the procedure in the courts was demonstrating that was true. But no vindication. I had nothing against anybody on this issue from this perspective.
But even to, for example, the Holy Father, that it would have become clear that you were right when you were telling him that you were coming up against the old guard and these forces and that Cardinal Angelo Becciu?
No, I think that in the whole process, when the Pope was informed of this issue, that they told him what they needed to tell him to get me out. They were very worried about the fact that we were doing a proper audit in a proper manner, following the correct standards and applying the rules of the game. And they thought that if I were to continue on this, maybe I would discover other things which would be unpleasant. So they had to find a way to get me out. So I'm convinced that they told the Pope enough to make him think that I was on the wrong side.
So the lawsuit you're taking against the Vatican now for reputational damage, loss of income, emotional stress, and then also the very tragic side of the story is that the person you were working with, your business partner, he died last year from cancer. And in the claim as well, you said that medical records that he needed to continue his treatment were confiscated by the Vatican, and you requested them back, but they had not given them, and that pushed back his treatment, and you said that it contributed to...
Sure, he had a prostate problem, which was being monitored by his doctors for many years, and it was being managed. Since he lived in Torino, in the north of Italy, and he was working in Rome, he decided to bring his medical papers to Rome because the Vatican medical assistant was just across the road from us, and this would allow him to continue monitoring on a systematic basis, and which was happening. So he had all his medical documentation in his office, naturally. When he was kicked out on the 20th, it didn't go, he was too upset to worry about his documents, but when he got back home, he realized he didn't have his documents anymore. So he called the office and asked the people in the office, the secretary, if they could kindly let him have his personal documentation. And they told him there was no documentation in the office because everything had been taken away. So he sent a registered letter to the head of the Vatican police asking for his documentation to be sent back.
His own private medical documents?
Yes. This was never, there was no answer to the letter. So I called Cardinal Parolin. I said, look, there's this problem, you know. At least let him have his documents back because then he can continue his medical treatment. And he inquired as well via his secretary, and the documents were not to be found. So they had to restart the monitoring. And it took several months before they managed to get things under control. And although he went to the Tumor Center in Milano, EAO, for treatment, and they didn't give him much hope. And in fact, he died 5 years later. He died 2 days from now.
2 days from now?
1 year ago.
What age was he?
He was 59.
59. When you were appointed as the Auditor General, it was in newspapers all over the world. It was online, it was everywhere.
I remember.
You remember. Your name was out there, top auditor.
I was shocked myself.
Man of the moment. How has business been since you left that position?
Well, when I left the Vatican, I no longer had any professional activities.
You haven't worked since?
I have one small engagement which I had before, which is 5 or 6 days a year, and I continue doing that, but 5 or 6 days a year is nothing.
And that's in the lawsuit, you believe that your name has been blacked?
Oh, I know, the search firms have told me, you have all the right qualities, but how can we propose your name when all you have to do is go on Google and you find that you've been spying?
The Vatican have dismissed your case. They said that it's a complicated answer, but that it wasn't the Secretary of State who fired you, the Pope's decision. Becciu was operating in a private capacity as a private individual, not as a member of the Secretary of State. The Vatican police, even if they had forced you into resigning, the Secretary of State are not responsible for the Vatican police, for what they do. What do you make of their response?
I think that's something that the lawyers will be answering when we hear the appeal on July the 3rd.
And not only that, but they said that you will not be getting the 9.3 million euro, but in fact you have to pay them, you and your former partner.
When they rejected our claim, they asked for 110,000 euros
to cover their legal costs.
Yes. Miserable request.
What faith do you have in...
Okay, in case you hadn't noticed, there's a lot said in this segment. I'm going to start with Becciu. He He was the chief of staff. He's the one that got rid of both Pell and Malone. He was ultimately found guilty of embezzlement and lying, and was to serve 5 years. However, that is currently under appeal. So let me give you a little bit about Malone. Before he joined the Vatican, he was chairman and CEO of Deloitte. Very well known, very highly respected. As a Catholic, he felt it was his duty to help the church, which he did do. But the whole process of going through the audits, what Bess Yu said is that Malone had been spying on them, but he was auditing. And he used that spying as the pretense to get rid of Malone. So I also wanted to point out something else. He talks about going to the head of the Vatican police. That's Domenico Gianni. That's the infamous owl post in the Q posts. Domenico Gianni was the Pope's personal bodyguard. He joined the Vatican in 2004. He became the head of the Gendarmerie in 2005. He was Benedict's personal bodyguard and Francis's personal bodyguard. And if you recall, the day of the raid on the Vatican Secretariat of State, he also resigned. So what he's saying is the Vatican police had a dossier on him of embezzlement, and of course it was fictitious, and so they were forcing him to resign. And in May, the month before he's meeting with the Vatican police, they had written his resignation letter. So they had absolutely framed him for a crime he did not commit, and he was either to resign or they were even threatened bodily injury. So it gets really interesting when you start looking into all of these individuals, because remember, who did Gianni work for? He worked for Vigano. Vigano was the governor of Vatican City, and Gianni worked for him. And go backwards, remember Vigano had disclosed publicly in 2011 that he had written 3 letters to the Pope that the Pope never got. Bring it back into Bertone. Bertone was the Secretary of State. But he'd written 3 letters about financial improprieties at the Vatican and was fired by Bertone, and then he ended up coming to the U.S. as nuncio, investigating McCarrick. So the circle just keeps, it's the same people over and over and over again. Am I saying Vigano's a bad guy? No, I don't think he is. But he was the person who that Gianni reported to. Gianni is not clean. Either Gianni's not clean or Gianni is the dumbest financial services, crime services expert from Italy ever. Remember, that's where Gianni came from. He was the financial crimes person out of Italy when he joined the Vatican. When did he join the Vatican? Well, interestingly, right as the financial crises happened in 2008. So 2004. It's after 9/11. After reports are starting to come out, and we find out. What did we find out in the 9/11 Commission report? That money had been funneled through the Vatican to the CIA to affect 9/11. So now you've got all 3 sides of the triangle presented in one story. And you can see, because of what happened to Pell in Australia, you can now see that there was definitely activity to cover up bigger crimes on a regular basis. I'm going to put my camera back on. I'm sorry, I forgot to. So I find it interesting, given everything that's going on at the Vatican. I find it very interesting that we're now at a point where Bess Yu is he's trying to appeal his conviction, and as a result of appealing his conviction, we're now sitting here talking about a situation where Malone is filing a lawsuit. And I've got another short video. This one is actually short, but I wanted to play the last one because, wait a minute, this is 2 of the same videos.
Francis,
there it is. I wanted to remind you of a situation back in 2018. If you recall, in August of 2018, right after, a couple of days after the Pennsylvania grand jury report was released to the public, Vigano releases his 11-page testimony to the public about the crimes. That's the flow charts that I've been showing you all through this. I went and completely decoded that 11 pages and realized that Vigano was probably Pope Francis's mouthpiece. And because of what he was doing, because he was bringing the public along with regards to what's really going on at the Vatican, which is why he got excommunicated. This goes back to Fernandez, by the way, who's equally as corrupt. So remember when that came out, Pope Francis enjoined the media to do their own research, to do their own investigation. He trusted in their journalistic integrity, which, wow, have you heard any of this? And that after some time he would talk to them. And what he's saying is, I can't talk. There's an investigation going on. I can't say anything. Now remember, Malone is saying that Cardinal and the Pope were both shocked when Malone got fired. And they're saying that Pope Francis did it. Well, this is interesting because right after all that happens, Pope Francis stacks the court. And in stacking the court, remember Bestiu was convicted in 2022. And now we've got Pope Francis stacking the court. Whole new high court at the Vatican, and Bestiu's appeal is about to be heard. Just as a follow-up, hold on. That video that I just showed you with Malone was from July 1st of 2024. On July 3rd, he went before the court in the Vatican, and they tossed his complaint. And so now he's appealed to the Court of Cessation, which is basically the Supreme Court of the Vatican. I don't know when that case gets heard, but if he doesn't have success there, he's promised to go to The Hague because of everything going on. So I'm going to ask a simple question, and while I'm waiting for you to answer, I'm going to go back and look at some comments. I'm going to ask a simple question. Have I shown you enough information that what you thought you knew was going on at the Vatican may be tainted, may be propaganda? Just like the play The Deputy that maligned a pope, now we've got the media being used to malign the Vatican. Do you guys see it? Are you familiar with this enough? Have you seen enough for you to come to the conclusion there's more going on there? And it includes other countries. It includes jurisdictions around the world. That there is something bigger going on than just financial mismanagement within the Vatican. Answer that question, and I'm going to go backwards. And I'm just going to say, Ann Boyer, thank you so much for the $20, and I'm glad you're finding what I'm saying interesting. In Victoria, there are 3 or 4 cities that were so-called church created. They were also places that have gold, always been rumors of trafficking. I don't know about those stories, but trafficking, using the church benevolence, using their charitable arm, has been going on for a long time, and that's what this is getting into, is they're going after the bigger story. And so trafficking isn't just in people. Remember, weapons, money, drugs, all of that was used, the Vatican charitable arm was used to do that. I'll fix the banner later. Both, I don't remember, but about 20 years ago, we were literally being bombarded by pedophilia and corruption in the churches. Everyone became wary of the churches and lost trust. like I said, I've talked about this before, and I'll bring it up in the next show because I've got a lot of other stuff that doesn't apply to the Q posts. But Bella Dodd gave testimony to Congress in the 80s. In fact, it was Bishop Fulton Sheen that convinced her to do it. She gave testimony to the Congress about how in 1921 they were given a directive to recruit young gay men to go into the seminaries. And when you start digging into that, you find out she was Catholic, and it was going into the Catholic churches that she was recruiting, but they were actually infiltrating all of the seminaries all across the country. So in putting them into the Catholic seminaries, what that does is that incubates them, if you will, and by the 60s, when they were needed to be in the hierarchy, many of them were cardinals. And so the goal was to get in a pope that they wanted, which will come out in another show. Okay, I see that, got that. I'm glad some of you just came in. You're going to want to watch the rest. Kez, I'm glad it's making you rethink everything, especially linking to Australia, because there's a much bigger picture when you start realizing that there are jurisdictions around the world and they're all so entwined that you've got an auditor, a well-respected auditor, being physically threatened by the head of the Gunda Maria, that's Domenico Gianni, and you've got Cardinal Pell sitting in prison because $1.3 million got funneled to do that. And obviously, there are people in Australia that have a reason to follow through with what a cardinal tells them to do. So when you think of the Q post of a worldwide stalemate, hopefully you're beginning to see the depth and breadth of what that means. I'm hoping. Now that the church is, that Pope Francis, before he passed, now that the church, the Vatican Supreme Court is stacked, these are good people, by the way, and being on the Vatican Supreme Court is not a full-time job. They retain their other job. But when a Vatican Supreme Court case comes up, it's a 5-year term. They're placed in 2023, which means their term will end in 2028. Unless Pope Leo decides to extend them, which I don't think he will. But by this point, we should see so much more stuff coming out. A lot more stuff, as a matter of fact, coming out. And if I can find what I found in open source, can you imagine what's not in public? Because I think that's a big deal. Let me play this last video. This one's only a couple minutes long.
Top story tonight, the
It is
highest-ranking Vatican official ever to face
4
trial
minutes.
in the Holy See's criminal court was found guilty over the weekend. Cardinal Angelo Becciu has been sentenced to more than 5 years in prison on several counts of embezzlement. The 75-year-old cardinal is the Pope's former chief of staff. Several other defendants were also found guilty of financial crimes and face similar jail sentences. It marked the culmination of the nearly 2.5-year saga known as the Vatican's Trial of the Century. EWTN.
Okay, I don't really need to go any further. I already explained all of this. So Becciu's got a 5-year jail sentence. There were 9 people total that were charged. I'll bring that in another deck. But all of the charges, to me, felt like a slap on the wrist. So I think what we're seeing is the apparatchik within the Curia in the Vatican protecting itself. They have to do some things, but they are protecting themselves in a sort of way. And I think that there are global interests involved with corrupting these trials. That's my view. That's my opinion. All I'm going to say is there's so much more going on. And thank you, Aldrin, for the $5. I really appreciate it. Did you jump out of your seat like Sean does?
For being with us, Art.
So this brings me back to after Pope Francis died. This is, to me, was one of the funniest things that had happened. And I see the connection in the Q post, by the way, as well as Mr. Poole. But the fact that the Pope is now dead, and I don't know why my whole slide isn't showing. Sorry about that. I don't get it. Let me see. I can fix that. Let me see if I can fix that. But anyway, so when the Pope passed away, what was funny was Best You, who had been banned, by the way, from the College of Cardinals because of his criminality, he tried to get into the conclave. And there was an absolute push to make sure that he did not get that did not happen. I'm going to fix this. Set as I'm doing it now. Just give me a second. I'm fixing this slide so you can see it. It's going to be hard, but you can see it. Okay, just go to the next slide. Okay, so Best You tried to get into the conclave, and evidently there was a letter written by Pope Francis that removed all doubt that the last place he was to be was in the conclave. So, knowing that the Pope in 2023 stacked the court and replaced everybody with people that have now got everybody worried in the Vatican, I have a feeling the story of Best You is not anywhere near done. And that was the point of that. So here we are. We are now into the papacy of Pope Leo. And Pope Leo is coming in at the tail end of all of this, right? And there's still work being done, but the hard part of the investigating has pretty much been completed. And it's been completed by people most people would never suspect. And I think that's what's very interesting about this story. But remember now, we've talked about all of this, the London property scandal. Best You defrauded the Vatican. He was trying to make money off the Chelsea property in London. Here's my opinion, again. The best I could do is give you that opinion because I don't have proof of this. But I think because there was one situation where there were nuns that had been abducted by terrorists, and they supposedly gave money to get the nuns released. Well, it turned out that that money did not release the nuns. It turned out instead that that money was used for their own purposes. And so I'm looking at this going, okay, I can see now where so much is happening that even the story about the nuns has been made public. So here we are with the London property scandal. I think they were trying to quick make money. That property scandal broke in the 2010s. It really blew up in about 2017, 2018. It became a key part of the Best You trial in 2022 and a part of the reason for his conviction in in December of 23. So I think that was a way to make money back. Remember, Malone said that a lot of the money, when he would find these weird transactions, he would explain it to him, and the money came back, he said. I think this is part of where this comes from. The Nunzio Scarano case. Scarano had embezzled, again, a huge sum of money, and he tried to leave, he tried to fly with it. And the suspicious activity report caught up with him. In fact, what's really interesting about this one is they found him in the UK, I think. And the UK tried to say that they helped the Vatican, and the Vatican came out and went, oh, no, you didn't. You didn't help us with any of this. So, again, that showed the international component with Interpol helping them to figure that out. Banco Ambrosio, we talked about that. That's the bank that collapsed in the early 80s. that the whole idea of money laundering, that's where we find out about the CIA laundering money. So we now have the Banco Ambrosiano, which is an Italian bank, but the Vatican had controlling interest in that bank. And then, of course, you got the VatiLeaks scandal that came out in 2012. I'm also going to point out that the original contract with Egmont, with Rene Brulhart, was crafted in 2011. After Vigano published his letters publicly, that contract got put on a shelf, and it wasn't brought in again until Pope Francis became Pope, and they actually ratified that contract and began working it on July 4th of 2013, after Pope Francis becomes Pope. So you can see all the cover-up. They keep getting stuck. Ria, thank you so much for the $50. My goodness, what a blessing you are. So one of the things that came out in the 2024 Vatican audit was that they were getting better intel, and there was fewer pieces of paper. The intel was actually doing well. And these are the things that they did. They suspended 118,000 in transfers. They froze $2.1 million in accounts, and two cases out of everything they audited triggered a full investigation. This is from 2023. Remember the stacked Vatican Supreme Court. So I'm looking forward to see who that includes. The most common red flags they found were these unusual cash transactions. 26% of the SARS were these unusual transactions. Remember, Malone said that there were these weird transactions, which he called misdemeanors. I'm going to bring this up here in a minute. Wait till you see what I'm talking about. And then there were transactions that were, quote, inconsistent with the customer profile. That was 23% of the files were that. And then finally, all the negative media coverage. These were common red flags in the 2024 audit that they found. So what are you talking about negative media coverage? Could it be that it was the Vatican funneling money to the media to sing their tune of all the negative stuff that came out? And remember, there's never been the media was never want for an opportunity to paint Pope Francis as an illegitimate pope, himself corrupt, overlooking and ignoring pedophilia, which I hopefully have proven to you that's not the case. But nevertheless, this right here came out of the 2024 audit. Pope Francis is still alive, but all the other players so far are gone. So one of the things that the Pope just did in October was he returned authority to the IOR to manage the assets. So these assets now being managed by the IOR, they were taken away under Pope Francis, but now because of the audit and because of the confidence on how strong the audits are, Pope Leo has now returned authorities to the IOR. What's interesting is that there was a confidential audit that was performed by Malone that had uncovered all the financial irregularities. And the corrective action, as brought out in the 2024 report, gave him the feeling he could now reverse the sanctions that Pope Francis put on the IOR. He had removed all authority for the Secretary of State of managing any Vatican assets. I don't know if you recall, but on October 1st of 2022, they had every church around the world had to make sure that the custody of everything related to Vatican properties and Vatican assets had to be sent to the Secretary of State. That's now been reversed as of October. And this, what it came out of is Pope Francis, remember I told you Cardinal Pell was a part of the Council of 9 Cardinal Advisors. One of their primary responsibilities was to rewrite the Vatican Constitution. In rewriting the Vatican Constitution, Cardinal Pell, the financial whiz of the group, had designed the Secretariat of Finance, or the Secretariat of the Economy, they call it. and gave that group, which is, they only report to the Pope. It's a civilian board that reports to the Pope on the asset positions that they have. Now, because of the audit, they're giving some of that back, but they are still subject to what that council of 12 people decide is best for Vatican assets. So we're watching things come around. Now I'm going to go back to Malone for a second, because remember, he wrote that financial audit, and he's also now suing the Vatican, and he's prepared to go to the Hague if he can't get what he needs out of the Supreme Court, out of the Vatican. He's prepared to go to the Hague. So now that we're waiting to see. I don't know where that stands. I can tell you that on July 3rd of 2024, when he took his case before the courts in the Vatican, they tossed it. So I don't know if his next step is the Court of Cessation or if he's going to go back to the Hague. I can't answer that question, but he's not done seeking justice. This brings me into the skeleton key issue. Just so you understand what a skeleton key is, it's a program that you can put it into any situation. The mob, the cartels, they use skeleton keys all over the world. In the Vatican, the skeleton key was used in the payroll system. So remember when I said that there were suspicious transactions? Wait a minute, let me go back. Where it says here, unusual cash transactions and transactions inconsistent with customer profiles. What they did is they got rid of those accounts, because what they were doing is they had profiles in the payroll system that didn't have any information in them. And they were using the payroll system to launder the money. That's how the money got into and out of the Vatican Bank. So that came under fire just in August. I'm going to remind you, the Vatican Bank is not a bank. It does not have a banking charter. It is officially a money transmitter, like Western Union. Walmart uses it. In fact, Walmart just got hit with a fine back in June. I can't remember how much off the top of my head. I think it was 10 million. But they just got hit with a fine because the money transmission services were being used. They're being used all over the world to launder money. And they've, I think, uncovered it primarily at the Vatican Bank. And now they can see it happening around the world. There have been several cases. Like I said, Walmart just got hit in June. So Archbishop Vigano, he put out a post in February of 25. The poor church of the poor, reduced to acting as a propaganda tool for the woke left, is now bankrupt. Actually, he's wrong. It's not bankrupt. It doesn't have as much money as it had. And please remember that COVID really hit the church hard worldwide because people weren't going to church. Donations are way down. And because of it, the church is hurting financially. That's a true story. But it isn't just because of the woke issue. When I was Secretary General of the Government, in my first year of management, I brought the budget of the Vatican City State from a deficit of 15 million euros to a surplus of 34 million, cleaning up crazy waste and rampant corruption. The continuation of my work was prevented by those who today we know are the main figures responsible for the economic collapse of the Vatican. After the flow of money from the American deep state to the Bergoglian deep church has dried up, and after the faithful, disgusted by the betrayal of the bishops, have stopped funding heretics and perverts, we now have the chirograph of the dying pontiff to collect money. What he's referring to is that Pope Francis, back in February of 25, this is February, he died in April, so it's 2 months before his death, he is putting out a special request to raise money for the church. So Vigano was governor from 2009 to 2011. The Vatican's IOR 2024 report showed that they did make 32.8 million. So they're not totally bankrupt, but from the church's perspective and its global presence, because they're in every country, it's not enough to further the church's mission. So we'll have to see where that goes. So he, before setting up a commission to ask for money from willing donors, financial statements must be published showing how the offerings of the faithful and the government funds have been spent to date. This report came out the same day as the letter, but the audit came out, I think it came out in March. Don't quote me. I for whatever reason, I don't have the date. But nevertheless, we do have fully audited documents. And so he instructed, if you recall, back in August, it was August of 22, that by September 30th, the Vatican, everybody, all the entities of the Vatican had to move all of their assets and funds to the Vatican Bank by September 30th. And like I said, that got moved into the Secretariat of the Economy, which has now been reversed. So the money laundering scheme, I'm running out of time. I don't want to belabor this, but I will say that the transfer services at the Vatican became a financial clearinghouse for money laundering. And where it's supposed to only be a transmitter for services within the Vatican, it ended up becoming something that was used to move money through and out using the payroll system. Like I said, you have an account set up, there's no name, there's nothing, only a banking piece of information, and they just populated that payroll account, the money would launder through, and there was no complete receipt as to what that transaction was about. And that's where we leave off for today. That said, I'm going to take these last, since I'm already late and it's 6:25 my time. Anybody have any questions, any thoughts, anything you'd like to say? I appreciate you're sitting here listening to this, because I believe this is a very important story. You cannot talk about our deep state without understanding the deep church. Yeah, I do think, Sober Lady, I think you're going to find out. Do you remember in Haiti, it was a Baptist church that was trying to take children out of Haiti. They were accused of kidnapping. It wasn't a Catholic church, it was a Baptist church. And unfortunately, everybody's so hyper-focused on Catholic, they don't see the news coming out of these other churches. All the churches, I shouldn't say that. A good majority of the churches have been corrupted. There's two ways to do it. One was the 501c3 status. By making them charities, they became subject to the government. And then you had the Johnson Amendment that prevented them from talking from the pulpit. Those two things, and then the constant, it's the constant drumbeat of corruption within the Catholic Church has actually impacted non-Catholic churches, because people are losing faith in religion as a result. And look at what Malone is saying. He was not only being physically threatened, but his partner, they wouldn't even give him back his medical records. His partner died at the age of 59 because of the corruption in the Vatican. So there's blood on everybody's hands. And all I can say is we are now in a situation where I think you want to be informed. This is all around the world. And BB Hearts, I'm telling you, it's the same thing in Canada. It's the same thing in England. It's the same thing. Pick a country. You're going to see the same model going on. How do you ensure a global governance? Remember, I showed you in the last show that radical socialism had infiltrated the church. Tell me Canada isn't facing radical socialism. I mean, we're watching it in real time. So it's the same for everybody. And like I said, where there's a deep state, there's also a deep church. But I want to leave you with a thought. Malone also said it. 100 people he dealt with at the Vatican, 95 were great people, 5 were difficult. We just saw a video yesterday where 1% are the problem. 99% of the people that work for government are good, hardworking people. and 1% are a problem. That goes back to a Q post, that 1% are the problem. What I want to leave you with is a lasting thought. If we are the children of God and God loves us, it's not going to allow us to go down. That doesn't mean become complacent. In fact, it's quite the opposite. You need to be a soldier for God. You need to be a part of the solution. And your real part as a solution-oriented person is to help others see the truth. So with that, I really thank everybody. Wonderful that, thank you so much for your support. I can't even begin to tell you how much that means to me. I've really, really appreciate the fact that you guys do that. Hopefully, you will see in the next show. I'm trying to move my banner because Tita said it doesn't work for her. Okay. Couldn't move it, but I made it bigger. How's that? Hopefully now you're starting to see that there's so much more to the story. Hopefully you're starting to see it. And hopefully you're ready to hear even more, because I got a lot more stuff. Starting next week, though, what I'll be doing is I'll be keeping you appraised of any new movement, any new issues that come up within the church, since this is my thing. And we're just going to start going through news. If there's anything that you would like me to talk about, and yes, I remember Jane. I know Jane's going to ask me about the 5 executive orders, which I've got the slides developed for. I will talk about those next Wednesday. I promise you I will do that. Other than that, I don't have anything else for anybody. I pray you all have a wonderful, wonderful day and a beautiful, beautiful week. Talk to you next week. Everybody, have a great, great night. God bless you.
flames, and the shadow